It started with something so small I almost laughed at myself afterward for even noticing. A missed text. A simple thing. Brooke, my wife of 7 years, had always been ridiculously quick to reply. Too quick. So when I sent her a message around noon asking if she wanted anything from the grocery store and it stayed unread for 5 straight hours, something inside me tensed. Not fear exactly. More like the way a hunting dog's ears prick up when the woods go quiet. That strange, tight silence you don't notice until it's too late. I was already irritated when I drove home that night, the kind of irritation that sticks under your skin like a splinter. When I walked into the house, Brooke was on the couch with her laptop open, sipping white wine, smiling like the queen of effortless living. The same smile that used to make me forget every bad day. Now it just looked fake, too perfect, like a wax figure that would melt if I stared hard enough. She barely looked up when I walked in. "Hey, babe," she said, voice sugary sweet, tapping something out on her keyboard without missing a beat. No mention of the text. No apology. I waited, standing there like a fool with a bag of groceries in one hand and a mind full of suspicion. Nothing. Later that night, when she was in the shower, I glanced at her laptop. It was open to a fashion blog, bright colors and headlines about spring trends and the best face serums for under $50. But the email tab was minimized, blinking gently like a lighthouse in the fog. Something about that little blinking light made my gut twist into a knot I couldn't ignore. I didn't open it. Not yet. Some buried part of me still clung to dignity. But the doubt was there now, crackling under my skin like static electricity. The next day should have been normal. I threw myself into work, crunching numbers, snapping at interns, keeping busy. I told myself not to spiral, not to go crazy over one missed text. But the feeling kept scratching at the back of my mind, a slow, methodical tearing. So when she texted me that afternoon saying she was meeting Jenna for drinks after work, something clicked into place. Jenna lived 2 states away. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted something concrete. Brooke had always been a master of turning arguments into my fault, twisting words like a magician pulling scarves out of a hat. If I went in blind, she'd dance circles around me, just like she always did when we fought about anything real. I made up a story about staying late at the office, but instead of working, I drove across town to MacArthur's, a restaurant she liked because they served overpriced appetizers and played jazz music at a volume just low enough for people to scheme in peace. I parked across the street, watching, waiting. I felt insane, ridiculous. I almost turned the car around 3 separate times. And then, just as I was telling myself to leave, to stop being paranoid, I saw her. Not with Jenna, with Ryan. Ryan was my business partner, my friend, the guy who spent Thanksgiving at my house when his own family blew him off. Ryan, who once told me Brooke was out of his league when he met her. Ryan, who now sat laughing with her at a corner booth, leaning in close, her hand casually touching his arm like it belonged there. I didn't burst in. I didn't make a scene. I wanted to. God, I wanted to. Instead, I left. I drove around the block 3 times, almost ripping the steering wheel out of the column, my mind playing a million broken images like a strobe light. Her laugh, his smile, the way she used to lean on me like that, back when I was her whole world. I needed proof. I needed more than what my eyes were telling me, because the heart is a stupid, stubborn organ that refuses to believe even the things it sees. The opportunity came 3 nights later. Brooke was working late again, and I decided to have dinner alone at MacArthur's, the very same restaurant. Call it masochism. Call it a test. I don't know. All I know is fate must have a cruel sense of humor. I sat down at a booth, ordered a whiskey neat, and tried not to feel like a ghost sitting at my own funeral. And then I heard it. From the next booth over, laughter. Her laughter. At first I thought I was hallucinating. It had to be a trick of memory, of pain, right? But then I heard Ryan's voice. Unmistakable. Deep and stupidly cheerful. I froze. Every muscle in my body went rigid as I listened. They weren't just talking. They were mocking me. Brooke was giggling about how clueless I was, about how pathetically grateful I'd been when she made time for me. Ryan added that he should be thanking me for keeping her polished for him. I sat there, staring at the half-empty glass of whiskey, while my world collapsed quietly around me. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't blur with tears. None of the dramatic things you see in movies. It was worse. I just went cold inside. A deep, still cold that felt ancient, endless. And then came the part that truly snapped something inside me. Ryan said, he actually trusts me to run the new expansion next quarter. Poor bastard. And Brooke laughed so hard she almost choked on her wine. I realized something then, something sharp and clear. I wasn't just a fool. I was a stepping stone, a joke. And Ryan, my so-called partner, my dependent little sidekick, thought he was about to win everything because he had stolen my wife. That detail I thought with icy calm would be his downfall. I didn't leave immediately. I sat there, listening, memorizing every word, burning it into the hard drive of my mind. Because when I moved, it wouldn't be messy. It wouldn't be impulsive. It would be surgical. And they wouldn't see it coming until it was far too late. I left MacArthur's without them even noticing. They were too wrapped up in their little fantasy world to care who might be listening, who might be watching. That was their first mistake. Their second mistake was thinking I was stupid enough to confront them right then and there like some angry soap opera character throwing drinks and shouting accusations. No, that would have given them exactly what they wanted. Chaos, confusion, excuses. I wanted clarity. I wanted power. When I got home that night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room, the digital clock blinking silently into the emptiness. 2:37 a.m. 3:04 a.m. 4:19 a.m. Brooke still wasn't home. I didn't even bother pretending to be surprised. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I just sat there and let the icy calm spread deeper into me, freezing over any last pathetic scraps of hope I still had. By morning, I knew what I had to do. First, I made copies, bank accounts, business contracts, email correspondences, everything Ryan had ever signed with me, every clause he had conveniently ignored because he trusted me not to screw him. I collected it all like a surgeon prepping for a very delicate operation. Second, I played Brooke's game better than she did. I made her breakfast that morning. Scrambled eggs, toast, bacon, her favorites. I smiled when she walked in wearing the same clothes she had on the night before. Her hair a mess, makeup smudged like she had slept in a stranger's bed. She flinched, just barely, when she saw the food, like some part of her knew she didn't deserve it. But she recovered quickly. Brooke always did. She sat down, humming a tune under her breath like she was the star of some movie where nothing could touch her. Rough night? I asked lightly, sliding a plate toward her. She shrugged, not even trying to hide the tiredness in her eyes. Jenna and I hit a few bars. Lost track of time. The lie slid so easily off her tongue it almost impressed me. Almost. Glad you had fun? I said, watching her carefully, memorizing the way she avoided my eyes. The way she stuffed food into her mouth too fast like she was trying to fill the silence before it could accuse her of anything. She never once asked about my night. Over the next few days I set the stage. I made a big show about being busy at work, about needing Ryan's help on a new project. I praised him in meetings, bought him coffee, joked about how lucky I was to have a partner like him. The idiot lapped it up, tail wagging. Brooke, meanwhile, became more careless. She left her phone lying around more often, maybe because she thought I was too blind to see the truth, or maybe because she enjoyed the danger. I started noticing things she didn't even bother hiding. Text messages with fake names that didn't fool anyone. Receipts for hotels on nights she claimed she was working late. Little glances at her reflection in windows when she thought no one was looking. Checking herself for someone who wasn't me. It would have been pitiful if it wasn't so infuriating. The confrontation had to be perfect. Not just catching her in a lie, but trapping her there, making her squirm, making her show her true face without any masks left to hide behind. I decided it would happen the following Friday. I told her we were invited to a big networking dinner. Fancy place, lots of important clients, a chance for us to show off as the perfect couple. She seemed annoyed at first, then perked up, probably thinking she could spin it into some excuse to be seen with Ryan. I played along, even suggested she buy a new dress, treating her like a prize I couldn't believe was mine. That night, I booked a table at the same restaurant where I first heard their betrayal. Full circle. Poetic, almost. We arrived early, dressed to kill. Brooke wore a blood-red dress that clung to her like sin itself, smiling that same dazzling, hollow smile she gave everyone when she was working a room. She looked perfect, untouchable, and completely fake. As we were seated, I made a show of being the doting husband, pulling out her chair, brushing a kiss against her cheek. She laughed too loudly, drawing the attention of everyone around us like a queen holding court. Then, right as she was basking in the attention, I excused myself, saying I needed to make a quick call. I didn't go outside. I went to the manager. 5 minutes later, the waiter came to our table with a complimentary bottle of champagne. "A gift," he said, "from a friend." I watched Brooke's face carefully. A flicker of confusion crossed her features. She didn't recognize the waiter. She didn't understand the game yet. The waiter poured the drinks. Brooke took a sip. Then the waiter placed a small black envelope in front of her with a little bow on top. "From your admirer," he said with a wink and walked away. Brooke laughed awkwardly, looking around to see who was watching. She opened the envelope, expecting something silly, something romantic. Instead, she pulled out 2 photographs. One of her kissing Ryan in the parking lot behind MacArthur's. Another of her checking into a hotel with him, hand in hand, looking giddy like teenagers sneaking out of prom. I watched her smile collapse in slow motion, like a building caught in an earthquake. She tried to recover, tried to plaster something onto her face. Confusion, outrage, denial. But there was no one here to lie to accept me. She looked up at me finally, her eyes wide and calculating. I smiled. Not the smile of a husband in love. The smile of a man who already knows he's won. Brooke opened her mouth to speak. And that's when the real fireworks started for a second. The whole restaurant seemed to shrink around us, like the walls were leaning in to hear every word she was about to say. Brooke closed her mouth again without speaking. Her hands, usually so graceful, so full of casual superiority, trembled slightly as she put down the photographs. She tried to smile. She tried to summon that manipulative charm she always used to wriggle out of situations when words could be bent like wires. But the cracks were already there, spiderwebbing across her pretty mask. "Ethan," she finally said, her voice pitched low, sweet, sickening. "I can explain." I leaned back in my chair and took a slow sip of champagne, letting the silence stretch between us until it screamed. Let her squirm. Let her taste the helplessness she had been feeding me for months. "Explain what, exactly?" I said, keeping my voice calm, almost bored. "Explain how you and Ryan have been laughing behind my back? How you think I'm some pathetic wallet with legs?" Her nostrils flared. Anger, shame, maybe panic. It flickered across her face in flashes, too quick to catch. She leaned forward, trying to lower her voice, trying to control the situation. Control was her oxygen. I was finally cutting off her air. "You don't understand," she hissed, her hand darting across the table to touch mine. I pulled back like she was venomous. "Make me understand," I said, loud enough that a few nearby tables turned subtly in their seats to listen. Brooke's eyes darted around, seeing the growing audience. For a woman who loved controlling the narrative, losing the room was like watching her get flayed alive. She dropped her hand and squared her shoulders. When she spoke next, the sugar had drained out of her voice, replaced by something harder, colder. "You haven't exactly been a thrill to come home to, Ethan," she said, her tone sharpening like broken glass. "You work late, you barely notice anything unless it's about the business, and you expect me to just sit around waiting for scraps of attention. What did you think was going to happen?" There it was. Not an apology. Not regret. A justification. A calculated missile designed to make me feel like I had driven her into Ryan's arms. I let the words hang between us for a moment, studying her, really studying her. The set of her jaw, the defensive glint in her eyes, the way she blamed me for every bad decision she made. Brooke didn't think she'd done anything wrong. She thought she was entitled to it. "I gave you everything," I said, my voice low now, sharp and clear. "You wanted a house, you got it. You wanted vacations, you got them. You wanted security, loyalty, someone who wouldn't run when things got boring. You had all of it, and you threw it away for Ryan? A man who couldn't pay his rent until I put him on payroll." Brooke opened her mouth again, probably to launch another carefully constructed monologue about how she was the real victim, but she never got the chance. Because right then, Ryan himself walked into the restaurant. He wasn't supposed to be there. That part wasn't planned. Maybe he followed her. Maybe he thought he was crashing some secret date night to gloat over my stupidity. Whatever his reason, He strolled into MacArthur's with a swagger that made my stomach turn, scanning the tables until his eyes locked onto ours, and the color drained from his face. In that moment, everything snapped into perfect, brutal focus. Brooke, Ryan, me, the triangle they had built out of lies and betrayal, collapsing right in front of them. Ryan hesitated, then started walking toward us, trying to plaster on a confident grin that fooled absolutely no one. "Hey, Ethan," he said, voice too bright, too forced, like a bad actor who realized he had walked into the wrong scene. I stood up slowly, not in rage, not to attack him, but to make sure he had no illusions about who had control now. "Ryan," I said, nodding politely, like we were old friends meeting at a funeral. Brooke shot to her feet too, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Ethan, please," she said urgently, trying to wedge herself between us, like she could physically block the consequences from landing. I smiled a cold, empty smile and reached into my jacket. Ryan actually flinched, the coward, but all I pulled out was a thin stack of papers. The contracts he had so eagerly signed months ago, the ones I had carefully rewritten after noticing his complete lack of attention to detail. I slapped them down on the table between us. "You're fired," I said, loud enough for half the restaurant to hear. "Effective immediately." Ryan stared at the papers like they were written in another language. His mouth moved but no sound came out. Brooke turned on him so fast it was almost funny, her fury snapping into existence like a match being struck. "You idiot," she spat, her polished veneer finally shattering. "I told you to be careful. I told you he wasn't stupid." There it was. The real Brooke, the one who blamed everyone but herself when her games fell apart. Ryan reached for the papers, desperate now, babbling about talking it out and not making rash decisions. But I just laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. "No negotiations," I said, stepping around him. "No second chances." I turned to Brooke, who looked like she might actually lunge at me, her hands curled into fists at her sides. "As for you," I said, "pack your things. I want you out of the house by tomorrow." Her face twisted into something ugly and desperate and spiteful all at once. "You'll regret this," she hissed. I stepped closer, so close that only she could hear me. "I already regret wasting this much time on you." And with that, I left them standing there, two broken frauds exposed and alone, while I walked out into the night, feeling the first real breath of freedom I had tasted in years. That I didn't drive straight home after walking out of MacArthur's. Couldn't. The adrenaline was still running through my veins like wildfire. My hands steady but my mind racing so fast it felt like the world itself was vibrating around me. I ended up pulling into an empty parking lot outside an abandoned strip mall, shutting off the engine, and just sitting there in the dark. No music, no movement, just me, the sound of my own breathing, and the heavy, undeniable fact that everything I had spent years building was now rubble at my feet. And yet, for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was the one suffocating. They were. Ryan and Brooke, caught in their own trap, exposed like rats in a spotlight. The mental image made me smile. Not out of joy, but something deeper, something colder. Satisfaction. When I finally went home, the house felt different. It wasn't just the silence. It was the weight that had been lifted from every room, from every object. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, the hallway, touching the backs of chairs, the edges of doors, like I was reclaiming something that had been stolen from me a long time ago without me even noticing. In the bedroom, Brooke's things were scattered like landmines. Dresses, shoes, endless makeup bottles cluttering the vanity. Symbols of the life we were supposed to share. I didn't touch any of it. I didn't need to. By tomorrow, it would all be gone. I slept deeply that night. No tossing, no nightmares. No waking up in cold sweats like I had for months without understanding why. Just deep, dreamless sleep. When I opened my eyes the next morning, the world was sharper, more vivid, more mine. Brooke came back around 10 a.m., stomping through the front door with all the subtlety of a wrecking ball. She didn't look glamorous today. She didn't even try. She wore a wrinkled hoodie, sweatpants, her hair tied in a messy knot. She carried 3 large garbage bags instead of suitcases, pathetic, desperate. A queen reduced to a beggar overnight. Good. She didn't speak to me as she moved through the house, yanking open drawers, throwing clothes into the bags without folding them, without even looking at what she packed. I leaned against the doorway of the bedroom, arms crossed, watching her, letting her feel the weight of my presence, letting her know she no longer controlled anything here. After about 20 minutes of tense, silent packing, she finally snapped. "You think you're so perfect," she spat without turning around. "You think you didn't do anything wrong?" I didn't answer right away. I let her words sit there, heavy and stupid. Then I said very quietly, "I was loyal." She laughed, a sharp, bitter sound, and turned to face me, her eyes wild with anger, with fear, with that unbearable knowledge that she had lost and had no one to blame but herself. "Loyalty's cheap when it's boring," she hissed. I smiled then, a real, humorless smile that made her take a step back. "No," I said. "Loyalty's expensive. You just couldn't afford it." Her mouth opened and closed like she was about to unleash another barrage of empty accusations. But no words came out. Maybe for the first time in her life, Brooke realized there was nothing she could say that would matter. I left her there, standing amid her garbage bags full of her broken life, and went downstairs to the kitchen to make coffee. The smell of it filled the house, warm and rich and normal, the kind of normal she could never destroy again. An hour later, she was gone. I didn't watch her leave. I didn't stand at the window like some heartbroken fool watching the woman who betrayed him disappear down the driveway. I stayed in the kitchen, poured myself a second cup of coffee, and sat at the table like it was any other Saturday morning. Because it was. Because she didn't matter anymore. I thought that would be the end of it. I thought once she packed her things and Ryan slithered back into whatever miserable hole he crawled out of, I would finally be able to rebuild my life, piece by careful piece. I was wrong. Because Brooke wasn't finished. Not yet. Started 2 days after she left. I was sitting at my desk at the office, reviewing the final steps of transferring Ryan's shares back to me. A process that was going beautifully, by the way, thanks to his complete and utter stupidity, when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring. I wasn't in the mood for telemarketers or misplaced apologies. But then it buzzed again, and again, and again. 6 missed calls in under 15 minutes. By the time I answered, my patience was razor thin. It was Brooke. "Ethan," she breathed into the line, her voice frantic and sugary at the same time. The same way a gambler talks when they realize they're one bad hand away from losing everything. Please just hear me out." I didn't say anything. "Ryan," she stammered. "He's not who you think he is. He lied to me. He lied to both of us. I made a mistake, Ethan. A huge mistake. I see that now. I miss you. I miss us." There it was, the desperate pivot. When betrayal didn't get her what she wanted, she tried to sell me the idea of nostalgia. As if the few good years could erase the hell she had dragged me through. Still, I said nothing. I let the silence choke her. "I wasn't thinking straight," she continued, her voice cracking into something that sounded rehearsed but frantic. "You know me. You know I get impulsive. But it didn't mean anything. It was just a stupid mistake. A phase. You and me, we're real. We can fix this." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. Finally, I spoke. "Does Ryan know you're calling me?" I asked, my voice flat. A sharp, guilty silence crackled through the line. "No," she said quietly. "But he's not. We're not. I don't want him, Ethan. I never did." Another lie, stacked on top of the hundreds she had already buried us under. I hung up without another word. For the next week, the calls didn't stop. Sometimes Brooke would switch tactics. Angry, weepy, apologetic, seductive. Flipping between personas like an actress auditioning for a role she was never going to get. Other times, it would be texts. Long paragraphs filled with half-truths. Sweet memories twisted into bait. Promises she was far too late to make. I ignored every single one. But she wasn't the type to accept being ignored. One evening, I came home to find her sitting on the front steps of my house, looking small and broken in a way that would have gutted me 6 months ago. Not now. Now it just looked like what it was. Manipulation wearing a sad mask. She stood up fast when she saw me, clutching a thin, cheap bouquet of flowers she must have grabbed from a gas station. "I'm sorry," she said before I even reached the steps. "Ethan, I'm so sorry." I didn't break stride. I walked right past her, pulled my keys out, and opened the door without so much as glancing at her. She tried to wedge herself into the doorway, blocking me. "Please!" she cried, tears starting to spill down her cheeks. "Don't do this. Don't throw everything away over one stupid. Get off my property," I said sharply, the words slicing through her desperation like a blade. She looked stunned, like she had been slapped. "You don't mean that," she whispered. I stared at her, not with anger, not with sadness, with complete indifference. "I mean it," I said. She stood there for a second longer, as if hoping the sheer force of her tears would change the outcome. When it didn't, when she finally saw that there was no light left in me for her to exploit, she broke. Not gracefully, not tragically. Brooke shattered. "You'll never find anyone better than me," she screamed, throwing the bouquet at my feet like it was an insult, not a gift. "You'll die alone, you cold bastard. You think you're strong, but you're just bitter and pathetic." I didn't react. I didn't even flinch. I just shut the door quietly in her face. I leaned against it for a moment, listening to her footsteps retreat down the driveway, her curses fading into the night. And when I turned around, the silence inside my house felt sacred, untouchable, a silence she could never stain again. But as much as she was gone from my life, the damage she and Ryan had done still lingered in the corners of my world. Cracks and shadows that needed to be cleared out if I was ever going to be free. I wasn't finished yet. Not with Ryan. Not with the business we had built. Not with the final stage of my plan. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break trust, it breaks reality. For weeks, every time I walked into my office, sat at my desk, glanced at a contract, there was a faint, invisible layer of rot underneath it all. Like the foundation had shifted while I wasn't looking. Ryan wasn't just a business partner. He was stitched into every part of my company's operation. Removing him wasn't enough. I needed to purge him from every thread he had ever touched. So I started quietly dismantling everything he had built. Every deal he had negotiated, I revisited, renegotiated, cut new terms that boxed him out completely. Every client relationship he had managed, I met personally, apologized for the inconvenience, and introduced a better solution. I didn't leave a scrap of his influence standing. At the same time, I hired a forensic accountant to go through every financial document from the past 2 years. Brooke's betrayal had taught me not just to look at what was obvious, but to see what was hidden in the seams. What the accountant found wasn't dramatic, no theft, no criminal embezzlement. But it was enough. Mismanagement, poor judgment, deals approved that should never have made it past my desk. Evidence of incompetence. Evidence I could use. I set up a meeting with the remaining board members. All people I had known far longer than Ryan had even been a part of the picture. I walked in with a dossier thick enough to break a wrist and laid it all out in clinical, undeniable detail. No rage, no dramatics, just facts. Ryan wasn't just fired. He was blacklisted. By the end of that week, he had no stake in the company, no leverage, no future in the industry we had built ourselves into. I watched, silently, as his reputation rotted from the inside out. Investors pulling away, vendors refusing calls, the rumor mill grinding him down until even people who had never met him knew one thing. Ryan Cross was a liability. Brooke, meanwhile, tried to keep playing games from the sidelines. Mutual friends would occasionally mention her trying to insert herself back into social circles, spreading different versions of the story. Sometimes I was the villain, cold and neglectful. Sometimes Ryan was the manipulative one, tricking her into everything. She changed her narrative depending on who she was talking to. It didn't matter. No one cared anymore. With Ryan out of the way, the company thrived. We closed 2 major contracts that quarter. Ones Ryan had said were impossible to land. Revenues climbed. Morale soared. It was like clearing an infection no one had realized was poisoning the whole body. And yet, despite all the professional victories, the nights were still long and restless sometimes. Not because I missed Brooke. Not because I missed Ryan. But because I missed who I had been before all of this. A man who trusted easily, who loved without suspicion, who didn't see shadows behind every smile. That version of me was gone, burned away. In his place stood someone colder, sharper, harder. Someone who didn't just survive betrayal, he weaponized it. I didn't chase closure. I didn't need Brooke's apologies or Ryan's confessions. What I needed was peace, and peace didn't come from forgiving people who were never sorry. It came from making sure they could never touch me again. One evening, a few months later, I ran into Ryan by accident. It was at a hotel downtown where my company was hosting a private event for a new partner. I was standing at the bar, chatting with one of the new investors, when I noticed a figure lingering near the lobby entrance, hovering like a ghost with nowhere left to haunt. Ryan. He looked thinner, older, like the months had drained him dry. His clothes didn't fit right anymore. Not in the way poverty shows, but in the way desperation clings to a man who's realized his best days are behind him. He caught my eye, hesitated, then started walking toward me. The investor next to me noticed and leaned in. "Friend of yours?" he asked, amused. "Something like that," I said coolly, not moving. Ryan stopped a few feet away, uncertainty flickering across his face. He opened his mouth, but whatever he wanted to say, apology, plea, excuse, dried up before it could form. He knew. There was nothing left to say. I turned back to the investor without a word, smiling easily, stepping deeper into the life I had rebuilt without him, without Brooke, without the weight of betrayal dragging behind me. Ryan stood there for a few seconds longer, invisible to everyone but me. And then he turned and walked away. I didn't watch him go. I didn't need to. He was already gone. It would have been easy to believe that everything was finished. Wrapped up, boxed, buried. Ryan humiliated, Brooke exiled, my company thriving. But peace is not something you win once. It's something you defend, over and over again, against the ghosts that refuse to stay dead. It started with a letter. Not an email. Not a text. An actual, physical letter. Slipped under the door of my office late one evening when most of the building had already emptied out. No return address. No name. Just my name, written in Brooke's handwriting. I stared at it for a long moment, feeling an old, familiar anger stirring in the pit of my stomach, heavier and darker than before. I didn't want to open it. I didn't want to give her even a second more of my time. But curiosity is a cruel thing. Inside, the letter wasn't full of apologies. There were no desperate pleas for forgiveness, no confessions. It was a warning. She wrote that Ryan had been talking to people. Not the kind of people who cared about contracts or reputations, but the kind who solved their problems with lawsuits and whispered threats. Ryan was blaming me for everything. For his downfall, for losing her, for every failure he was too weak to own. And according to Brooke, he wasn't just angry anymore. He was desperate. Desperation makes men stupid, dangerous. I leaned back in my chair, the letter fluttering from my fingers onto the desk. The city lights outside my window glared in at me like eyes. If she was telling the truth, and that was a colossal if, then Ryan might try something reckless. He had nothing left to lose. And men with nothing left to lose are capable of anything. Part of me didn't care. Let him try. Let him dig his own grave a little deeper. But another part of me, the part that had learned the hard way never to underestimate people once they think they're cornered, knew better. I needed to move first. Cut off the last, rotting branch before it could crash down on everything I had rebuilt. The next morning, I called my legal team. I didn't tell them everything. Just enough to make them move. We tightened the contracts even further. Reviewed every old transaction involving Ryan. Combed through every clause, every dotted I, every crossed T. I wanted him tied up in so much red tape that even if he screamed, no one would hear him. Then I made a second call. Private investigator. A good one. Someone who could find out exactly who Ryan was talking to, exactly what he was planning, and exactly how I could break him if he ever tried to crawl back toward my life. It didn't take long. Ryan had been meeting with a minor competitor, a man whose company I had undercut a few years earlier during a major deal. Someone who hated me just enough to listen to Ryan's drunken fantasies of revenge. The two of them were plotting to poach clients, spread lies about me, sabotage contracts. Amateur stuff. Childish, sloppy, but dangerous if left unchecked. I didn't get angry. I got efficient. The investigator gathered evidence. Pictures, emails, audio recordings of Ryan running his mouth in bars to anyone who would listen. The man was a wreck, a live grenade waiting to go off in his own face. All I had to do was give him a little push. And I did. I sent an anonymous tip to the competitor's biggest investor, attaching just enough proof to show that aligning with Ryan would turn toxic fast. Within days, the competitor backed away like Ryan was radioactive. Another door slammed shut. Then another. And another. Within 3 weeks, Ryan's name wasn't just mud. It was erased. No job offers. No partnerships. No invitations. He wasn't blacklisted from just our industry anymore. He was untouchable. As for Brooke, I never answered her letter. I didn't thank her. I didn't acknowledge it. Maybe she warned me out of guilt. Maybe she did it to protect herself, thinking if Ryan went down hard enough, her own mistakes might be forgotten. It didn't matter. She was a ghost now, like Ryan. And ghosts don't get second chances. I thought that was the end of it. But the past has sharp edges. And sometimes, even when you think you've swept up all the broken pieces, one cuts you when you least expect it. The last cut didn't come from Ryan. It didn't even come from Brooke. It came from someone I never expected to lose. Someone whose betrayal felt quieter, but somehow even sharper. Her name was Morgan. She had been my closest friend long before Brooke ever came into my life. We met in college, study partners, late nights in coffee shops, pushing each other through exams and bad relationships. Morgan had been there when I got my first job, when I built my company from scratch. She was there when I proposed to Brooke, smiling brighter than anyone else in the room. I trusted her in ways I didn't even realize until it was too late. After everything blew up with Brooke and Ryan, Morgan was the one person who stayed. Or so I thought. She checked in, brought takeout to my house, sat with me through the silent, bleeding nights when I didn't want to talk to anyone else. I thought if there was one person I didn't have to question, it was her. I should have known better. It started subtly, conversations that felt a little too careful, a little too rehearsed, texts that came slower, smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was just paranoid. Maybe betrayal had rewired my brain, made me see knives where there were none. But then I overheard her on a phone call. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I walked into the office late one evening, catching her in the conference room, pacing, her voice low and urgent. "I can't keep doing this," she was saying, frustration raw in her voice. "He's not stupid, you know? He's already suspicious. If he finds out we're even talking." She stopped dead when she saw me standing there. The silence that filled the room was thick enough to drown in. I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. The look on her face said everything. After a long moment, Morgan hung up the phone without a word and faced me. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice brittle. "It's exactly what I think," I replied, feeling that old coldness creeping back into my bones. "You're working with them." Her eyes flashed with anger, with shame, with something uglier I hadn't seen before. "Not working," she snapped, "trying to keep you from burning everything down, trying to stop you from making it worse." "Worse for who?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. The truth was painted all over her face. Brooke. Morgan wasn't protecting me. She was protecting Brooke. Maybe they had stayed friends behind my back. Maybe Morgan had bought into Brooke's lies about how I had neglected her, forced her into Ryan's arms. Maybe she just couldn't let go of the past, of the comfortable version of our friendship that didn't exist anymore. It didn't matter. I felt nothing. No anger. No sadness. Just a deep, final kind of disappointment, like watching the last piece of a broken bridge fall into the river below. I stepped back, away from her, from the lies, from everything. "You're fired," I said simply. Morgan's mouth opened in shock, in outrage, but I didn't wait for her to speak. I turned and walked out of the conference room, out of that chapter of my life, slamming the door behind me without looking back. She didn't call. She didn't text. She disappeared as completely as Brooke and Ryan had. I thought I would feel empty. Instead, I felt lighter, like every time someone betrayed me, they were peeling off another heavy, suffocating layer, stripping me down to something harder, sharper, untouchable. The loneliness that followed wasn't kind. It wasn't noble. It was brutal, but it was honest. And honesty, after everything I had been through, was worth more than any friendship, any love, any familiar lie. I rebuilt my life again, not carefully, not slowly, ruthlessly. I cut away everyone who made excuses for betrayal, everyone who thought loyalty was optional, everyone who thought kindness meant weakness. I didn't just survive them, I erased them. And for the first time in a long, long time, the man standing in the mirror wasn't haunted by what he had lost. He was only focused on what he was about to build next. Months passed. Seasons turned. Contracts signed. Milestones shattered. Expansion plans set in motion like dominoes. From the outside, it must have looked like I was thriving. And in many ways I was. But survival changes you. It teaches you that peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the ability to stand in the center of a hurricane and never flinch. People kept their distance now. Even the ones who smiled, who shook my hand, who toasted my success at networking events, they kept a careful step back, like they could sense that something about me was no longer safe to lean on. I didn't mind. Trust was no longer a currency I traded in. But even so, there were moments, sharp, sudden moments, when the old echoes tried to creep back. A laugh in a restaurant that sounded too much like Brooke's. A face in a crowd that resembled Ryan's for just a split second. A perfume, a song, a place we once loved. I never ran from those moments. I stood still and let them wash over me like a wave against a stone. Unmoving, unaffected, unbreakable. One evening, well after midnight, I found myself driving without really knowing where I was going. No destination, no plan. Just the engine humming under me and the empty roads stretching ahead like a blank page. I ended up at the old waterfront. A place Brooke and I used to go when we first started dating, back when everything felt invincible, infinite. The pier was empty. The water was black and endless, rippling under the wind. I stood there, hands in my pockets, breathing in the salt air, letting the weight of everything I had lost, and everything I had gained, settle deep into my bones. A part of me, the soft part that hadn't been completely crushed, wondered if maybe Brooke had loved me once. If maybe Ryan had been loyal once. If maybe Morgan had cared once. But the better part of me, the part sharpened by every knife in my back, knew it didn't matter. Intentions don't excuse actions. Love doesn't erase betrayal. And memories don't rewrite reality. I stayed there for a long time, staring out at the water, letting it pull at all the invisible strings still knotted inside me. And then, just before I turned to leave, I made a promise. Not to them, not to the ghosts, not to anyone who had ever let me down. Promise to myself that I would never again let sentiment be a leash around my throat. That I would build a life so strong, so full, so unshakably mine that no one could ever fracture it from the inside again. And if the cost of that life was loneliness, so be it. Better to be alone on solid ground than surrounded by traitors on sinking sand. I drove home that night without looking back once. Not at the water. Not at the memories, not at the wreckage, because what was coming next would be mine, all mine, built from ash, from scars, from ruthless clarity. And no one, not Brooke, not Ryan, not anyone, would ever touch it again. The thing about endings is that people expect some dramatic crescendo, confrontation, tearful apology, a final slam of a door. But real endings are quieter, sharper. They happen the moment you stop bleeding for people who cut you. Months turned into a year. My business wasn't just surviving, it was dominating. New deals, new faces, expansion that Ryan could never have dreamed of. Investors who once barely returned my calls now fought to get into meetings. I had built an empire out of the ruins they left behind. Brooke stayed gone. I heard whispers sometimes. A mutual acquaintance mentioning she had moved to a different city, tried to start over, tried to pretend she hadn't gambled everything and lost. No one cared anymore. Ryan disappeared even faster. Last I heard, he was working some dead-end job in a company he used to mock, the kind of place where ambition went to rot. Good. As for Morgan, gone. Vanished like she had never existed. That hurt longer than I wanted to admit. But even scars have their uses. They remind you where to never be wounded again. There were still moments when the weight of everything almost cracked through the surface. A good deal signed. A celebration where I caught myself scanning the room for people I used to think would always be there. But the loneliness didn't break me, purified me. I understood now what they had taught me without meaning to, that survival isn't about building walls. It's about becoming the wall. One night, standing on the rooftop of the newest building my company had just acquired, a tower that glowed against the city skyline like a blade, I looked out over everything I had reclaimed. It wasn't victory that filled me. It was silence. A deep, endless silence that no one could ever stain again. I thought about the man I used to be, soft, trusting, eager to believe that loyalty was enough to keep people honest. That man was dead. Good. The man standing here now understood something better. You don't protect your life by trusting people to guard it for you. You protect it by making it impossible for them to ever reach you, no matter how sweet they sound, no matter how convincing their smiles, no matter how much history they drag behind them like broken chains. I turned away from the city, the wind tearing at my suit, the sky wide and black and infinite above me, and I walked back inside without hesitation, leaving the past behind for good, buried under the empire built from every betrayal they ever thought would destroy me. They made me stronger, and they would never touch me again. Not in this lifetime, not in any.